Thank you for joining us today for our special presentation on building bridges behind bars. We're very excited to have everyone here. And just so you know, we will be sending out a recording of today's presentation along with a list of resources that will be mentioned throughout the afternoon. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat nations on the land known as Turtle Island. We honor their enduring connection to this land and recognize the treaties made here. As we gather, I commit to continuing on the road to learning and ensuring that my children and my children's children are educated on the true history of the country and the rich cultures of Indigenous peoples, including First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. Together, we strive to support reconciliation, respect, and justice. We are here as part of the Palliative Care Echo Project, and this is a 5-year national initiative to cultivate a community of practice and establish continuous professional development amongst healthcare providers across Canada. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And we would like to send out a special thank you to Health Canada for their financial support of this project. Now I'd like to introduce our special guests. Today we have Louise Brazier, a Bereavement Services Coordinator for the North Simcoe Muskoka Hospice Palliative Care Network. And we have Inga de Bruin, who is a retired RN who is joining us from a sunny, warm location. I will hand the floor all over to Louise and Inga.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. I can't see everyone. I can just see my notes and I can see myself and I guess whoever is going to be speaking. So please, Amanda, feel free to interrupt if there's something going on I need to know about. I am just getting plugged in here. So yeah, thanks for attending our Bridges Behind Bars presentation today. Please use the QR code to take the survey. We appreciate your feedback. We're excited to share our story of what happened when we delivered a grief and bereavement course to a group of inmates at a federal medium security prison. This pilot project came about after multiple conversations with the chaplain. He'd flagged a need for bereavement support. The project planning process began and we drew inspiration from a palliative approach to care after seeing a video of how it was possible at Angola Prison in Louisiana. So this presentation will be a bit of a Dear Diary as we share our experiences of what happened when we went into the prison and how we had to adapt to extremely rigid conditions, learn a whole other subculture, including their slang language and way of life. As much as we were the teachers and facilitating the group, we were also very much the students. We saw some stuff and we heard some things that you don't encounter every day. So we hope by the end of today's session, you will have gained an awareness of challenges to providing care to criminally involved individuals, taken an in-depth look at the unmet needs of this population that could be met through hospice palliative care, and worked collaboratively to gain tools, recommendations, and resources for building hospice palliative care capacity. Before we start the video clips, please note, as Amanda said, the audio could sound quiet, so you may have to adjust your volume on your device for these segments of the presentation. This video is of my colleague Enga, who retired back in February and is now living her best life in sunny Cyprus. Enga, who presented a version of today at HPCO's conference back in 2018 with me, will have video contributions throughout this presentation. This would not have been possible without her. We are thrilled to bits to also have her zooming in from Cyprus today, and she'll be able to answer questions at the end. So a huge warm welcome to Enga.
Thank you. We will talk after, sure. So my name is Inge de Bruin. I'm a PPSMC, Palliative Pain and Symptom Management Consultant with the North Simcoe Muskoka Hospice Palliative Care Network. Been working with them for a long time. January of 2013 I started with them. Absolutely love the job that I've had in those years. So this is Trooper, and he really gave us some leverage to getting some of the guys interested in coming to the group, even if they weren't really feeling the grieving and bereavement part. Trooper is a big draw.
Fun fact about Trooper, he is actually here today as well. He's just having a little nap at the moment. He started his early career as part of a program in the US called At Both Ends of the Leash. You can learn more about this from the link in the resources. My hope is by sharing our learnings, challenges and troubleshooting with you that if you're so inspired, you can absolutely deliver hospice palliative care in the most unlikely of settings. Also, it came to my attention as I did a run through of this with a friend, I make the assumption that everyone knows what hospice palliative means. I know that sometimes the language can be confusing. So even though we drew our inspiration from end-of-life hospice care, we are also talking about grief and bereavement support being included in that continuum of care. So by show of hands or by using the chat, who here has been inside a prison? Just for curiosity's sake, maybe you can just pop that in the chat for us.
One person, two people, 3, 4. So several. Wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you. So we weren't really sure what to expect. We thought it would be an environment like you see in the movies with everyone behind closed bars and shackles and chains. We couldn't have been more wrong. This is where we ended up, in cottage country, in the Muskokas. This aerial view is of the medium and minimum areas. You'll notice the runway of the local airport in the background. If you've ever driven up Highway 11 North, not long after you make the bend around Gravenhurst towards Bracebridge, the prison is tucked just off the highway there. As you can imagine, we were nervous about who we'd be supporting, and I don't want to discount the extra stress you feel as a female, especially going into a facility like this. It's all well and good to say we're lovely hospice workers, we're neutral, we meet people where they're at. All true, but fear of the unknown and the hypervigilance, especially when you're new, is a real thing, and it's exhausting. We also fully acknowledge the impact of the crimes committed and the effect they've had on the victims connected to these inmates. We will discuss further how we had to check our own biases and sometimes rely on our gut instinct when selecting individuals for group. So who we supported, it would have been someone's dad, grandfather, brother, and very likely someone who didn't have the same advantages growing up compared to those of us that thrive. Adverse childhood experiences, poverty, mental health and addictions were prevalent in a large percentage of the population we supported. Also, this won't surprise anyone on here, but the Indigenous people were grossly overrepresented in there. So why is hospice palliative care so important in a correctional institution? Canada's prison population is getting greyer, and the Correctional Service of Canada is working on a strategy for how to deal with the ageing inmates. Inmates 50 and older are considered to be in the ageing category. That cutoff point might seem young to someone on the outside, but health is generally poorer behind bars. You can basically add a factor of 10 years onto chronological age. That means more heart problems, diabetes, and other ailments in facilities that were designed with much younger occupants in mind. Stairs can be tough to navigate, and there are often long distances between the buildings. 1 in 4 inmates in Canada is over 50, but in some prisons, that age group makes up more than half the population. So we're dealing with an aging population that is actually sped up by about 10 years due to multiple factors, environment, and stress. We were specifically being called in for bereavement support. We learned just how big a gap this was when we did the intakes. More on this later.
So I truly believe that a palliative approach to care in any of the jails in our areas is highly needed. My belief is that everybody and anybody should be able to tap into a palliative approach to care whenever they so wish to and need to, whenever they have a life-limiting, life-threatening illness. And what I've seen in the past going into the jail system, the correctional facility, there is lots of people with walkers, in wheelchairs, and I believe there must be lots of people with life-limiting or life-threatening illnesses. So yeah, I do believe it's very important for us to provide a palliative approach to care in those facilities.
I'd like to bring your attention to a couple of YouTube clips. Inga speaks to the Angola one for us.
So there's a video on the Angola correctional facility in Louisiana, which really hit home. It shows where they have in the correctional facility, which is a high security facility, where they have educated some of the inmates that were interested in it to take care and take part of the palliative approach to care for the people in the correctional facility that are going through end of life and need more personal care. So they actually do the personal care for their fellow inmates in there, and it works beautifully. They have learned, they've gotten the education, and they get a ton of things back from taking care of the inmates. It was very worthwhile watching, so if you've got a chance.
Thanks, Inga. We won't watch the Angola one now due to time constraints, but if you're interested, I invite you to watch it later. The link will be in the resources. Interestingly, Louisiana has the toughest sentencing policies of any state in the US. As a result, 1/2 of the 5,000 inmates at Angola are serving life sentences. The one we're about to watch is out of Vacaville, California.
My name is Sean Reese. I'm 35 years old. I ended up committing attempted murder. And when I came here and I got this job and I started showering people and helping people change diapers, and I was like, man, these people are really sick, man, you know, and like it just opened up my heart. You know, my mom was in prison, my dad went to prison. I can say that I was a really, really angry person. I didn't care that you were another human being. That didn't matter. A guy named Nick, I used to go in his room and talk to him before he went to the hospital, and when he came back, it was amazing, like what the chemo and the cancer had did to his body, you know, and he stuck his hand out. He couldn't talk. He passed away a couple of days later, and for a second, like I didn't want to do this no more because I didn't want to see that.
Well, we had a patient, his cancer was just a horrible kind of cancer. And he was a white supremacist, swastikas and other kinds of tattoos all over his body, arms, legs, everywhere. He became really good friends with Sean, a black Muslim, and Sean took really good care of him to the point where he wanted Sean there with him. He trusted him. So here's a white supremacist, and all those walls are just falling down. And when he died, it really affected Sean emotionally. So hospice in that sense becomes a place of healing within their spirit, within their families, and within the community, rather than just a place of death.
I received a sentence of 54 years to life in prison under California 3 strikes. My illness is terminal lung cancer. I applied for a compassionate release. They said that I still pose a threat to society.
There have been quite a few men that I have been in favor of a compassionate release, but they weren't able to get out. Many of the men are just totally incapable of doing any other crime when they get out because of the state of their physical condition when they're here. No one of the decision makers actually came down and looked at them. They just looked at what was on paper, but it would have been nice if they would have just looked at them and talked to them.
I have 3 grandchildren I've never seen. I have a son I've never seen before. And I'd like to have the chance to see them before I pass away.
You know, watching all these people die and then they put them in the bag and then they wheel them off. I'm like, come on, man, there has to be something that's greater than this. This job, if you allow it to, if you don't block yourself off, if you don't close yourself off, then it'll help you. It'll really help you to deal with a lot of the issues that you might have. I figure God put me here for whatever reason he put me here, so I'm going to figure out what that is.
Why should we be returning good for evil? They have done real horrible things to society, so we should do horrible things to them? No. These are human beings that are broken, that need repair, that need healing. That is just the right thing to do. And so in the hospice, we give them that healing, and I believe that heals society as a result.
Pretty amazing, right? When we were putting our project proposal together, we really drew inspiration from what they'd achieved there. So before we could go into the jail, we had to apply for special security clearances and receive safety training. All volunteers must receive this training. We were surprised that a large element of the training was around how not to be manipulated by the offenders. You think, well, how could that possibly happen? But the reality is it does, and they used true life stories of staff who had been manipulated and it hadn't ended well. It became apparent that setting healthy, respectful boundaries from day one would be important. We had to make a list of everything we would be bringing into the prison also. We worked with the chaplain to put together the project proposal. One of the main objectives was to deliver an 8-week support group to address the needs of grief and loss. This project was needed as offenders may or may not have been able to be with their loved ones at end of life and may or may not have been able to attend the funeral. Then we got really lofty with some of our wishes and dreams for this project. One of the longer term goals that was written into the proposal was to be able to build a compassionate community within the community of the prison. We plan to educate and empower them to be able to deliver their own support groups. We wanted to learn what hospice palliative care looked like there. Did it even exist? How could we support this? Could we deliver the fundamentals of hospice palliative care course down the road? Imagine if the whole institution, including the guards and the warden, took the course. So Beaver Creek is a medium security federal prison. So for sentences longer than 2 years, inmates end up there. More than half of our group were lifers and had previously been in a maximum security institution. They were also listed as dangerous offenders. This information was volunteered to us as the group progressed. So think for a minute, how would you feel going into a federal prison? What would your concerns be? So feel free to just have a thought or pop it in the chat if you wish. We were quite nervous, and we also had to navigate our own feelings around how do we feel about servicing people that maybe took another's life. For me, I arrived at a place of this doesn't take away from what I know to be right and wrong. We were both at peace with hospice's philosophy of meeting people where they're at without judgment, and where they were at was in prison. So you are always between 2 doors in prison. Once you are through the main doors, it's very similar to airport security. I think the guards graduated from the same charm school that Immigration Canada uses, and as a newcomer, I speak from experience. Your belongings go into a bin that gets x-rayed and you walk through an x-ray machine. As volunteers with security clearance, you are spared the sniffer dogs and pat downs. We did witness visitors getting the whole VIP experience. We were going over what we would be bringing in, and everything you bring in has to be documented and approved. We were hyper vigilant and really thought through whether a 3-ring binder could be used as a weapon. It turned out that we didn't need to be that concerned. They wore poppies around Remembrance Day, they had pens, and there were lots of items around that could be used as weapons should they choose to do so. We even considered how we should dress. We dressed down as per our safety training. At our initial talk over what we would bring in, it was explained to us that this group had been screened by the chaplain, and he felt that at this point they'd have so much to lose, they wouldn't dream of causing any kind of fuss. Almost as an afterthought, we were like, Kleenex, we mustn't forget the Kleenex. The chaplain explained to us we wouldn't need Kleenex and that there was toilet paper if they needed it. You can imagine how soft 1-ply prison toilet paper is, right? We insisted that Kleenex be added to our gate pass. Guess what? We totally needed the Kleenex. To this day, we still tease the chaplain about his quote. So here's what we did. Intake day was probably the hardest day. We hadn't been issued PPAs, personal protection alarms, as the chaplain had escorted us in and taken responsibility for us. Anger and I were in a one guy came with his pet turtle. Another shared that he was grieving the loss of a person whose life he took. That was weird hearing that for the first time. We thanked him for his honesty and for sharing. During our debrief, we raised a concern that we hadn't been issued PPAs and the project was almost pulled before it started. It took a few attempts for the chaplain to understand our position. He'd acquired a comfort level with 30 years experience and had built a rapport with many of the inmates. We needed him to know that as women going into an all-male prison, we were vulnerable and not feeling heard. In his experience, he'd only ever used his PPA for a medical emergency. In our experience, we knew that grief could present itself in the form of many emotions, including anger and rage. After a few emails from our supervisor, our concerns regarding safety were addressed. So this is how it looks from inside the grounds. The offenders are able to walk around freely, but have certain times of the day they are locked into their ranges. In the beginning, we would be accompanied by the chaplain, but as our comfort level grew, we would cross the grounds unaccompanied, and usually when we were moving around, they were locked in their ranges. So, question to everyone, how about your biases? Do you think you would have any to navigate? And what would be a deal breaker for you? Or are you all just lovely hospice people on here? So please pop your thoughts into the chat. And Enger, I'll hand this over to you.
Yeah, I'll keep a lookout. On the question you had before, safety was the main concern of people too, for just thinking of coming into a correctional facility. We're not used to it, right? For sure.
Okay, I'll carry on and we can come back to
It
it.
might be a little bit longer stories.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
personal
sure.
safety again, yeah, would be a bias.
So honestly, in our experience, it's kind of better if you don't know why they're in there. Although it's public record, you're in a privileged position that could enable you to acquire information on the offender and the crime. Maybe it was a high profile case, or maybe their grief is related to the crime and it's disclosed to you. My number one piece of advice to anyone doing this is do not Google it.
Yeah, I've got one note in here that, hang on a second, I think I would go in with an idea that I'm different than the inmates. And Catherine says, not sure that I would be this way, but would be that feeling I am sure as they are the other. So it's the same, kind of the same thing. Being manipulated, I guess, by them from Agata.
Yeah, especially when a bulk
So yeah,
of the
those are both things that went through our mind too, right?
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Especially because the bulk of the training was made up of don't be manipulated, and you're like, I'm not going to be manipulated, but obviously it happens. So we were anxious to get the first week under our belt, but soon realized that lots of things in the system were out of our control. Lockdowns, medication lines, schedule conflicts, even the time it takes to move through the gate. We wrote the first week off as a full start as the offenders trickled in late with many missing. There was confusion as to where everyone was. We think it was flu shot day, which is mandatory in there apparently. Some were on lockdown. The positive we gained from this experience was becoming more comfortable in the environment and building a rapport with a few of the offenders. The ones that did show up were keen to start, and we gave them the option of starting the group as is or waiting to see who came next week. They chose to start the following week, and so it became clear that we would have to be flexible and understanding. So many things were out of our control, and absolutely everything was out of their control. Week one, again, this week was a sharing week. We prepped them that it could be difficult, and it was. Having the chaplain as a participant in the group really did pave the way for others to share. He opened up first, and then the others felt like they had permission and felt less vulnerable with each other. There was a strong theme around guilt, especially around the relationship with their mothers. The sharing included tales of awful childhoods with abuse and neglect, the manner in which they learned of the death, some by Christmas card that arrived in May, informing them of 3 deaths, some after a period of time had passed, which added to the feeling of not being important enough to be informed of a loved one's death. There was little to no support after being informed. One person shared that after they were informed, the cell door was left open that day. This act was recognized as an extension of kindness by a guard. Not being able to be there at end of life and not being able to attend the funeral ritual celebration had been difficult for many. They spoke of being stuck and not being able to reconcile that people had died. It wouldn't be until when and if they were released and back in their familiar environment would they fully understand that their loved ones were deceased. As we learned during intake, showing emotion is a sign of weakness in a prison. However, most people during their intake did at one point break down. Again, during the session, we worked hard to establish the circle as a safe place, and some found it easier than others to show emotion. Once someone had shared and cried, it seemed to open up the door and make it more acceptable for the others to follow. One person did use hand gestures that were fully understood by the group to warn and ask that what he was about to share didn't ever leave the room. The learning circle agreement and group norms around confidentiality were very important to this group. We began every session with lighting candles and a read-in. They were very much aware of their anticipatory grief. There seemed to be an awareness of how much this had hurt and how this will hurt in the future with other loved ones. Also, their own grief of family members and friends had given them fresh perspective on the grief that their victims' families were feeling, and they expressed remorse for this. On week 2, we explored primary and secondary losses, working through a curriculum very similar to the one we use in community. This week proved very difficult for the guys to come back. One guy in particular needed some convincing and encouragement to stay. He tried to return his binder to us, expressing that week 1 had opened some old wounds. I want to share more about this person in particular later on in the presentation. One of the other guys shared his grandfather was at end of life, so we were trying to come up with a game plan of how to handle that. There was positive feedback from the group regarding saying their loved one's name. They hadn't previously had an outlet to do this. There were issues with where they saw themselves morally. We had to work hard at leveling the playing field in this session. The guilt they expressed spilled into shame and then putting us on a pedestal and moral high ground. The chaplain was starting to understand as to why we insisted on keeping this group small. He had initially wanted a larger group to service more men, and we had advised against this. Week 3's theme was relationships with friends and family. Whilst waiting for everyone to arrive, we learned tidbits about them, including the one guy who had delivered his son when he would have been all of 17 years old. They told us about their life in there, the jobs they have. Some were in recreation or maintenance. Some, like life on the outside, came with more perks. They shared the stressors around making dinners as a group and having to share and wait for pots. They shared it was better not to be friends with guys on their range to avoid conflict around dishes. They seemed very engaged and were buying into the program by their own admission. On week 4, we explored emotions and different types of grief. One of the guys shared about the loss of his dad and the build up to this, not being able to voice his emotions at home for fear of upset. He was prohibited by his mum. This was triggered by a conversation around being stuck in grief. Another group member opened up more this week and could identify with the participants' stories. He seemed less reluctant to attend, and they all felt it was benefiting them. They really were doing the work, and the curriculum was lending itself to a natural flow. Their questions seemed to segue into the next topic. They made a comment about the benefit of having females facilitate the group, expressing that they may not open up to a male. The chaplain also shared this opinion. At this point in time, we were challenging this thinking. So pop this in the chat or just have the thought to yourself, but do you think male facilitators would work, or is a female presence necessary? Midpoint, we conducted some evaluations and their feedback was lighter, quite helpful in letting my feelings out in front of others, one day closer to freedom. It is better once you start on the second week. So this fella again, I'm going to keep coming back to him, the one who wanted to return the binder. I'll tell you more about him and how he grew through his grief as we progress here. On week 5, there was a really great discussion.
So that's some, Louise, we got some answers in the chat, and a lot of people say both, but depends on the trust level with the facilitators. So yeah, could be either or.
Interesting. Thank you. There was really great discussion on week 5 around what funerals and traditions look like for each member. We acknowledged the diversity of backgrounds in our group. We asked them to think about how the memorial ceremony could look for week 8, as they were in charge of designing this. They identified if they considered themselves intuitive or instrumental grievers, and most agreed they were both. On week 6, the theme was memories, legacy, and celebrating those we'd lost. While Stanger and I were waiting for the guys to show up, an inmate who was nothing to do with the group, but had the job of being the chaplain's assistant, came and sang us a song. Just appeared out of nowhere, sang to us, and left. It was beautiful, and we took it for the gift it was. That wasn't the only memorable thing about week 6. Everyone but one person had forgotten their reading glasses. It was quite comical and tender, actually, to see a group of guys who wouldn't have even acknowledged each other previously share glasses and joke around. One guy openly asked us to share something of ourselves, so we did, our experience with personal losses. On week 7, we were supposed to explore special days and anniversaries. We found out the day before we couldn't go in as they were on lockdown. We believe it was something to do with their Christmas canteen pickup. So the following week, for some reason, only 2 guys attended, so we had to reschedule. It seemed that missing even a week, as we had the week before, completely threw them off their routine. We took the opportunities to speak with the one guy, the one who delivered his baby, regarding the possibility of him helping run a group. His reaction caught us both off guard. He was visibly moved that we had such confidence in him. It was as if no one had ever encouraged him to believe in himself. He opened up and shared his fears around parole and how the system could very easily, depending on the parole officer's mood, put him back in jail. So on week 9, obviously it was supposed to be 8 weeks, but it went a little bit off its course there. We combined week 7 and 8. It was January 4th and the tree was still up in the chapel. We had full attendance for this session, and we put together with the inmates' help a memorial service to honor their loved ones. It ended up being a beautiful service with real candles for the opening ceremony, followed by song, readings, and reflections. There was a reading that was a letter of gratitude to the group and the facilitators. The guys shared that they had built a rapport with one another that didn't exist before, and they shared an understanding and had more interactions outside of the group. They were appreciative of knowing others had gone through it and that they weren't alone in their grief.
So we started our first group in 2017, and you've got to realize that any group that you start might not be set on the days that you're going to think that you're going to do it. There might be lockdowns the morning off and you can't get in. We actually were in lockdown in the facility at some point because there was a tornado warning. A storm came through and all the guys got ushered back to their rooms, and we stayed in the chapel in lockdown because we couldn't get in or out. So from 2017 we have done the 2 groups in the medium and the 1 group in the minimum. We have put a proposal in to get those done and get capacity built for the medium and the minimum. After that, we then did the fundamentals of hospice palliative care. We did the grief one-on-one sessions. Everything that was put out in the proposal, we got done, and capacity is built in the facility, especially in the medium. Although there's some shifting, but we've got enough people in there that can help move things forward. So done quite well.
Enga mentioned the lockdown, and that was one, possibly 2 of my nightmares being played out that day, on the day of the tornado warning.
Yeah.
We did some end evaluations, and here's some of the quotes here. I feel not so heavy and helpful to deal with grief if it comes again, and deal with it in a positive way, given a time and a place to grieve in a safe environment.
So I just wanted to mention too that it was a pleasure to go in there and support the fellows in the jail system. The changes that we saw from week 1 from their grief group to the end, where we normally do a little bit of a celebration and set something up for them. The change in those guys was immense. The change between them as inmates, all in the same facility, where they were very standoffish at first, and at the end of the 8 weeks they would look at each other, nod, give each other a handshake, which was way more than what they would have gotten without going through the course. So I honestly do feel that the ones that are interested going through the course and putting the work into it receive an immense amount of reward back from it, are better for it, for sure.
Well said, Enga. Always a privilege to witness growth like that. We have some cassette tape recordings of some of the guys sharing their snippets of feedback. So for those of you on here who don't know what a cassette tape is, ask your mum. They were popular back in the 80s. Luckily for us, there was an old tape recorder kicking around so that we could obtain these testimonials. I don't even think it was a new tape that we used, which is why the quality isn't the best. So technology, as we found out, is a little delayed in corrections by at least a couple of decades. And we also had some photos taken with the inmates with a camera that used actual film. And I don't think we've ever seen those photos to this day. So Amanda.
No, I think they were half done, or because they had to be sent out to get developed. They're not digital. It was just a whole happening. We had to make an appointment to get them done, remember?
Yes.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Inmates, we started, they were strangers, and when we finished, we left brothers. And in prison, it's not as easy to show your emotions around everyone because it's seen as a type of weakness. People see, obviously it looks like you're a weak person if you're crying in prison or whatever. But to be able to sit here and with others that are going through the same process as myself was like Doug was saying, it was type of healing. The same with me is the type of healing to talk about it and get it out in the open.
You know, learn. Like I learned so much, and when it was over, I quite honest with you, I did not want it to end, and that in itself says that it had a true impact upon me. It left me wanting to learn more, in fact, and I still want to learn more about what I can do to help others. I mean, you know, person.
The quote that stands out for us and rings true based on what we encountered in there is this: if I'd had this kind of support earlier on, maybe I wouldn't have ended up here.
So throughout the time that Louise and I have been going in there, it really has become very clear to me that a lot of the inmates that are there because of missed opportunities to go through grieving and bereavements when things were happening, either through the position that they were put into, their makeup of their families, their cultures. But I could see if we would do a better job at supporting people in their grief and bereavement from the time when they get in there, that perhaps we might have some people that would not be coming back, or perhaps not as often.
So I work here at the prison as the Catholic chaplain, and this pilot project with several inmates dealing with the reality of grief and loss in an environment where men are incarcerated was really an eye-opener for me. I was surprised at how quickly the barriers broke down with the men, and including myself, by the way, in all of this. And that was the beauty of the program. We were on a level playing field from the very beginning of the sharing, in which the men openly, more and more, got to the deeper issues of personal loss and the experience of grief, the problem sometimes of guilt or shame that was attached to that for them regarding the loss of their loved ones because they weren't able to be there. And it certainly opened the doors of perception for me in my own personal journey of grief and loss. They, in their sharing, open sharing really, it was kind of like a catalyst to awaken in me some of my lack of ability to grieve and experience loss and work through it. That was perhaps the biggest gain personally for me, was to share openly elements, parts of my own experience of loss, of family members particularly, that I had never shared before in a group or with anyone. And so it was a healing experience, and it was a very beneficial program. And I think we will try to do this again. I think it represents an area of need amongst prisoners to be able to get to the heart of this matter. It's part of their whole rehabilitation, as it's called, and it should work towards a better reintegration, having dealt with deeper emotions like this, worked through them, resolved some of them, and brought some closure to some of them. So I'm very grateful to the ladies who kindly volunteered their time and their energy and their expertise to provide leadership and to share with us their gifts. Thank you.
So we talked about doing the fundamentals of hospice palliative care in the correctional facility. And for those of you that have been in palliative care for a long period of time, you might remember the old Fundamentals of Palliative Care course, 8 weeks long. And this is the book that goes with it. And because we are working in a correctional facility where the inmates do not have any access to internet, in the medium, actually, they did not even have access to any computers. In the minimum, they do, but not internet. So we used the old book, nothing online, and we did the old way of teaching, 8 weeks in a row, and went through the whole course that way, which I don't mind at all. I kind of like that.
We had invited the most nurturing personalities from both of the groups, the initial groups that we did. And Inga delivered the Fundamentals of Hospice Palliative Care and I, Bereavement 101. They then became the facilitators of the very course they had participated in. And what was unique and quite unheard of at this point in time was that staff, volunteers and inmates were all at the same table learning together.
It was received quite well by everybody in the group, inmates as well as the people on the staff, the chaplains, the volunteer. They actually enjoyed the course quite well. I don't know if all of the stuff that's in the course needs to be taught, so we've been working on perhaps condensing it a little bit for them, just because the time constraints in a correctional facility, they're huge. You're really working with only an hour and a half, 2 hours that you can get them to sit down for any kind of education or group sessions.
So I want to point out the fella, the one who wanted to return his binder because it was too painful on week 1, who was probably the most reluctant participant. That guy is now actually the lead inmate facilitator for the group. I asked Inga what her wish list would be for the future.
So things that would change or would be on my wish list, I guess, would be to have perhaps a little bit closer connection with the warden, because they have a lot of say in the facility. And during our time there, they changed over a few times, and it feels like you got to start over from scratch and get your permissions going again. So I would like a little bit of a better connection there. The other thing that would have been very nice if we would have had some of the guards in the combined education that we did in the medium, where the chaplains and the volunteer and the inmates were taking the fundamentals of hospice palliative care. That would have been very nice. I don't know if that is something that can be done, just because there is different other barriers that they have to cross over. But that would be a wish in my mind, for everybody to have more patience, have more meaning for each other, like just be more human, I guess.
So where do we go from here? To build capacity, we will continue to train inmates at the minimum institution to bring them up to the same level as the medium, and consult on an as needed basis, and to keep spreading the hospice bug.
So when you're thinking of the prison system, the correctional facility system, it is a slow changing system. We have just touched on a very tiny little piece, and I'm very grateful, kind of proud too, that we have built at least the capacity in the medium facility by now, and hope to continue. But if anybody, and I hope that there's going to be people that are going to be perhaps even inspired by this, by our doing, to start something like this up, just know that it doesn't go fast. It takes forever. It is really a stone that you throw into a pond, and it has a ripple effect that is very, very, very slow. But please persevere.
Again, I'd like to acknowledge the victims and their families. Our service in these individuals in no way minimises the crimes they are serving sentences for. We know that in a different time and a different place, these men, likely under the influence of drugs and alcohol, acted very differently than they probably would today. Whether or not these offenders are ever living in a community alongside us or in the community they are currently in, their exposure to hospice palliative care has increased their humanity. Now, I will hand this over to Enga for the case study and for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Gosh, we actually have some time left for the case study. I didn't think we would. So we just put up a little case study for you guys. Meet JD. He is a 52-year-old incarcerated individual. He has been serving a 15-year sentence for a non-violent offense. 2 years ago, JD was diagnosed with an advanced hepatocellular carcinoma, which is a liver cancer. And despite interventions, his cancer has progressed and he is now receiving palliative care. JD has no immediate family support as his parents are deceased and his siblings are estranged. His primary support network consists of fellow inmates and the prison chaplain. So what do you think would need assessments be that are needed for JD? Just if you want to think about it and put it in the chat for us. So what kind of need assessments are needed for him? I know it's very hard to even imagine. So who will be the decision maker if he's not able to make any decisions? You're so true about that one. Another thing that was really jumped out at me too is that none of those guys can sign a DNR paper. They don't have any rights or any say. So Catherine says symptom amendment for JD. And Francisca says the public guardian would be able to make decisions for them. That's a dicey one because a public guardian is normally not very eager in making decisions for any other person, especially because they probably have lots of people in their caseload. And I'm not sure how well aware they are of the person they are helping out or making decisions for. But yeah, it would be the public guardian that has a lot of say. Any other needs assessment that you guys can think of? So Amanda put the next slide up, and those are the need assessments that we can think of that would be very helpful. Physical needs, psychosocial needs, spiritual needs assessment, and grief and bereavement support needs assessments. So all those would need to be done and taken care of. Kathleen says holistic everything. So a truly palliative approach to care, spiritual thinking. And Susan says emotional support for the journey towards the end of life for sure. So what kind of interventions are needed for JD, do you think? Just remembered, he is incarcerated. Like Louise said, things go very slow in there. What kind of interventions are needed? Help with his daily tasks as he gets weaker, right? Additional medical care. Does he need referrals to outside medical professionals? Yes, and all those things can be arranged, but again, it's not like just picking up a phone and getting an appointment and getting it done because everything takes a little bit more time. Coaching and self-advocacy. Yep, a very important one and limited in a jail facility. Stephanie says someone to help support emotional, social, and spiritual needs for sure. Amanda, can you push it through? So interventions are physical care, so we got to take care of his physical capabilities, psychosocial support, spiritual care, and grief and bereavement support for fellow inmates and for himself as well. So implementation of grief and bereavement support. A group of 5 inmates who are close to JD are trained to act as peer supporters. This group meets weekly with the mental health professional because they do have a mental health professional on staff at all times there, to discuss grief dynamics and strategies for supporting JD. So what are the benefits and outcomes of a grief and bereavement group for JD, for fellow inmates, and for the prison system? If you guys want to think about that and put it in chat. For JD, dignified accompanied end of life, for sure. Creating a more compassionate space, better emotional well-being, decreased burnout and compassion fatigue, possibly, for sure. For the fellow inmates, support through their grief and bereavement. For a path towards their own grieving for fellow inmates. For JD, ease that he's not alone through his palliative journey and to improve quality of life, end of life. For the system, movement towards a more humane system. Oh, and I love that one, Susan, because that one is big on my priority list, to change that very slow moving institution to something more humane. For the prison system, Laura says shift to more compassionate system as well. Wonderful, guys. Thank you very much. I want to open it up for some questions. If you guys have any questions, just because we are at 2 minutes before time. The next slide is on references. And I think, Amanda, you can clarify. People, if they want, they can get the slides sent out to them, so they've got all the references and all the links, right? Because if you guys want to watch the Angola one, the Angola video it's superb. Like, have a look at it.
We'll send out we'll send out a link to the recording from today, as well as a link to all of the references that are listed.
That is wonderful.
I do have a question. I know, Louise, I think, Louise, you mentioned something about trusting your gut instinct. Can you speak more to that and how that applies in this situation?
Louise, I'm going to give that one to you, because I remember the one group that we had a gentleman and we did not feel like he was the right person to be in that group, right? And it was a total gut instinct, more from yours than mine.
Yeah, brilliant. You covered it, Edgar. We're not mental health professionals, so we really did have to rely on our gut instinct and try and not be biased against this person, but he wanted to know right off the bat where we were from, which is a fair question, but it's not something we were offering up at intake. And so when we didn't want to tell him, we politely declined to give him that information. His body language shifted considerably, where we felt unsafe. So that's where we relied on our gut there, because we didn't have anything else to rely on. So, and we kind of had a rule that if one of us didn't feel safe, then that would be the case for both of us. But I think he's the only person we turned down, right?
There was one in the medium group that we didn't want to have come in at some point as well. But it's more, we're in this palliative approach to care work. We've been doing it for a long time. You learn to read people. You learn to read between lines. It's honestly that gut feeling that keeps you safe and that helps you help other people as much as you can. I've got Francisco, and she's asking if this pilot program is still continuing until present. I'm going to give that to you, Louise, just because I'm retired for nearly a year now, so I'm kind of out of it. So I'll leave that one up to you to answer.
It is, Francesca. It did coast a little bit during COVID because we just couldn't get in there. And now how it looks is they've had a change of warden, they've had a change of chaplain. So we kind of need to start over again with our requests to going in. But the medium facility is set up. They're good to go. We did what we said we would do. We built capacity. It's just that minimum institution has a little bit of training outstanding still, but if they were really creative, they could be running the groups by themselves. But in an ideal world, we would have an opportunity to go back in. And that is the plan. Like, we do have staff that are taking the torch from Enga and ready to go in. So they've done all the things we talked about. I think they're waiting for the training still, but it is still ongoing, just sort of like as and when, as opposed to being scheduled several times a year, like when Enga and I first started it.
And just to be mindful of everyone's time, I'd like to thank you both now. Please feel free to stay on if you have any other questions, but thank you, Inga, for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. And Louise, thank you. This project is something that's been wonderful to learn about and to hear about, and to actually hear those audio clips of the inmates was something special. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And stay tuned, everybody, for our next Echo session. Be sure to fill out the survey. Let these lovely ladies know how amazing they did today. And we will see you again soon.